back in the day when we were making copies and putting in boxes, then it just sat. You couldn't do anything with it.
Right.
And now we have all these, we need to run analytics on it. We need to know, did we actually back up valid data or was it compromised? How do we know? And then let's not even get into backups are under constant attack. I mean, they're at the top of the list as far as what ransomware or bad actors are looking to get rid of.
Right. So I think that the other thing that we have to touch on there is, why are we using that analytic data? Now we're beginning to discover that IT doesn't get to live in the dungeon in the basement in the dark with their 14 copies of tape, right? IT is a partner in the business. All of that data has value. So we, as good stewards in IT, have to change our relationship with the business. With the line of business, we have to have a better relationship with legal, compliance, regulatory, and that helps us as much as it creates new work and new burdens. I think it helps us because now we can have conversations with the business, asking them, what are you doing with this data? How valuable is this? What does an outage look like? How quickly do you need to come up? Do we have TCOs on the impact to the business and risk? And that conversation is very different than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, yes, it is. Night and day. I mean, just the players. I mean, the individuals involved in these conversations. I mean, the doors have been blown off. It's no longer, I love it, to your point, us backup guys, that's where our seat, and my seat was quite literally when I was at the bank. It was in the basement where
Right.
the gouger was. And I used to joke around saying, yeah, I sit down in the basement in the dark where the mushrooms grow until somebody needs a restore. And I get to come out and do my restore, and then let's get back in your hole. But now, the CIRES guys, the backup guys, the DR folks, they're up front. They're front and center. They have
Right.
spotlights on them. It's in preparation for our conversation here. It really made me realize something, Ted. And I thought about every single one of us, every person out there that has a job or works for a company. And this light went off in my head. It was the idea that we all think that we were hired for the role that is our title, but reality is every single employee from the C-suite down to the person that washes the windows or takes out the trash, if they have a login or an email address at that company, their first and foremost responsibility is the security and resiliency of the company data.
Right.
Their second role of responsibility is whatever their title is, whatever they were hired to do. But
Right.
all of us, our first role and responsibility is the security or safety of the company data.
Right.
And that's a mindset we all need to adopt.
Right. And for those of us that are in IT, we end up having that hat 2 or 3 different ways. We end up owning security and resiliency for data and the business just purely in IT. And we end up having constant conversations with the security team and other teams in the company about how they want to be increasingly secure or increasingly resilient. And that's going to lead to our next question. So tell me how you and NetApp see, let's say, the difference between data protection and what we're going to call disaster recovery and or higher availability.
I love that you're going there, because here's the thing. Every single business out there has some form of backup. Reality is backup exists. It's a necessary evil everywhere. But not all backup is created equal. And at the same time, not everybody, a lot of customers, backup may very well be their disaster recovery solution. And everyone has their own SLAs when it comes to how fast they need to be able to recover. And so ultimately, when we start talking about how do you delineate or determine disaster recovery versus backup, oftentimes it comes down to a bit of terminology. We all have our own definitions. For instance, our definition of archive back in the Countrywide days was we'd actually make a copy of data. I'd be given a data set, write it to tape, stick it in a box, and shove it in Iron Mountain or Recall for 30 years. That was our archive. But if you notice, I didn't do anything with the original data. All I did really is just take a backup for 30 years and stick it in a box.
Right.
But that was our definition. So oftentimes when we talk about backup, we're talking about restores. So when seconds count, or you need to keep the lights on, we're not really talking about a restore because it tends to take more time. So when we're talking about that seconds count or critical workloads keeping the lights on, there's the disaster recovery conversation. Now we're talking about failover or failback, which is night and day different than a restore. But then, okay, how do I determine what qualifies for backup versus what qualifies for restore or for failover and DR? And that goes back to that identification and classification and then assigning the ownership, because those of us that are on the storage side or even on the backup side or even in the DR side, we don't belong to the line of business or the business units. So how can we tell what data is critical? This is where we have to go to others and we have to
Right.
engage the data owners, the application owners, those other folks that you probably typically wouldn't interface with as a IT individual. So
Right.
we get them to sign off, and it's actually the line of business owners or the business units that give us that delineation of what's critical that needs to be failover, failback, and what needs to be backed up and kept for a certain amount of retention for whatever purpose that be, it compliance, governance, or even just to restore whatever the data may be. So again, how do we delineate? It's all about that criticality. At least from a NetApp perspective, we want to give you the ability to deploy your storage the way your business dictates, but then also have the tools to go out and identify, classify, assign ownership, and tag the data so that you can build your protection policies.
Yeah, so I would agree with all of that and add to that that one of the things that we've discovered is in this brave new world where we're not just concerned about failures, but we're also concerned about compromise, we see that data protection and higher availability are often at odds with each other, right? If I have compromised data in one location and I'm doing some really high availability replication to a second site, it is very likely the case I've replicated the compromise to that other site. So my ability to fail over and fail back very quickly is absolutely still there. The problem is my ability to recover from that compromise has actually been made a little worse, right? So
100%.
now I have to figure out how to take my data set and decide what do I want safely away, like the crown jewels. I want it somewhere where it can't be compromised, where it can't be deleted, where it can't be altered, versus what do I want that I can get back quickly? Or can I get back in seconds or minutes what used to take hours or days? And for Evolving Solutions, one of the reasons that I think that we're excited about how we work with NetApp is because we see that that tool set spans the gamut between both data protection and higher availability, right?
You were spot on, Ted. Absolutely. Because it really, in how we achieve this is we took an approach of building the tools into the operating system. We 100% understand and subscribe to that multi-layer strategy. And in fact, we absolutely believe that those third party applications, they absolutely have value because let's face it, not everybody is 100% NetApp yet. I mean, we're only a 30 company them all or to convert the world. But reality is we took an approach of building these tools into the operating system because it doesn't get any closer to the data than having them built in. And by built in, I mean putting things like gates around data impacting commands or the ability to create backdoors so that you've got checks and balances with your critical commands as well as critical users, but then also being able to lock things down and prevent the ability to delete or compromise or encrypt data, but then being able to have not just defensive posture tools, but also offensive, where we can identify users that are causing the trouble and take those users offline to prevent them or stop them from doing the damage that they're currently doing. So it's taking that approach of building the necessary tools into the operating system, but also understanding that there's an entire partner community that we tie into to make it all a unified, secure, protected environment.
So I would say that first, I'm very, very impressed with the fact that the same interface, right, ONTAP, makes it very possible for me to administer in the cloud, in the data center, and at the edge. On top of that, not only do I have a common set of tools and interfaces, which makes it easier for me and a team to administer things, it also means that I get the same kinds of behavior. I can replicate between data center and data center. I can replicate between on-prem and cloud. I can replicate between edge and data center. Furthermore, if I have a common tool set, I begin to come up with ways to use the tool set, ways that maybe people didn't originally think of. So NetApp has a function of snapshot. It's called SnapLock, right? It's the ability to not just create snapshots, but to create secured snapshots, snapshots that could be locked and not able to be deleted. Evolving Solution says a snapshot is not data protection because if my primary array fails, my snapshots go with it. But if I can replicate my snapshots to a different location, now that's interesting because I snap very quickly and I can roll back to a snap very quickly. And then I literally had this conversation with somebody yesterday. Great. What about protecting the logic? NetApp has that problem solved now with multi-authentication. So now I have the ability to stop people from, so I'm going to use the term resume generating events, right? So
Yes.
now if I want to do a dangerous administrative function, I can have a team of people overlook each other's work. But that also lends itself to, in the event that an attacker has found credentials for one user in the NetApp stack, they're still not going to be able to compromise the data because they're going to need oversight from a larger group of people. So all of a sudden, I have layered defense, right? Defense in depth, where between snapshots and replication and multi-user authentication, now I'm beginning to build a big animal that covers the gamut between high availability, disaster recovery, and real data protection.
You know, it just, I love that you went there. It goes back to that concept of what we have done with ONTAP and the idea that folks hear me say things like ONTAP is ONTAP is ONTAP. And what I mean by that is it's quite literally that pool of resources to hand to a customer with which they get to deploy, protect, secure, manage, and recover the way their business dictates, regardless of whether it's in their four walls of their data center, in somebody else's data center or colo facility, whether they're running on our hardware or they want to run it on somebody else's hardware as a virtual instance,
Right?
or pick your cloud provider of choice. You know, the big three, they all have the ability to run cloud volumes ONTAP. So again, to your point of that single UI, regardless, and on top of that, all three of them, Google, Azure, and AWS, all selected ONTAP as a first party service, meaning they all have ONTAP, and customers gain experience and knowledge and exposure to ONTAP without ever even talking to someone from NetApp, because all three of them, they own it, they sell it, they manage it, they support it. So they can have their own first party ONTAP offering within their own cloud provider. So, and we're the only storage company or intelligent data infrastructure company that can say that. No other operating system, no other storage operating system exists like that. And so the other part that brings is going back to that single UI. One of the other studies that has been done is there's a huge skills gap in the cyber resilience space. So whether it's the security side or the data protection, backup and DR, there's a massive skills gap just because having structure. So when you have a single UI that can perform all of those functions, it goes back to enabling those new admins the ability to learn and leverage those same tools regardless of where the customer data resides.
So I'm going to ask that as a question then. Let me see if I got this right. You're saying that I can get NetApp volumes. I can get NetApp storage as a first party function sold by GCP, Azure, Amazon, and IBM Cloud. That those are readily available so that I can mix and match between what behavior I get NetApp on-prem in my data center at the edge. And you're saying I can do that in cloud now as well,
You
entirely.
bet. You bet. Looking at Google Cloud NetApp volumes or Azure NetApp files, or even looking at FSx for NetApp ONTAP and
Okay.
AWS. All three of those can be purchased in the marketplace. And the beauty of it is, even with our own unified control plane that is BlueXP, where most would have to go and log into each of those cloud providers, but you can actually deploy those very same services from within our own unified control plane. So that's same UI to deploy cloud services within those cloud those cloud owners or those the hyperscalers, and giving them the ability to deploy and manage those services under their own security and company moniker and tools, but all using that same UI across all of the platforms.
So I want to go directly to what you just dropped into this conversation, and I want to talk about BlueXP. I want to
Absolutely.
talk about BlueXP because I had somebody ask me when NetApp talks about data classification, right? So those of us that are do IT work often struggle with data classification because we are not the application owner. We can tell you what kind of data it is, sure, but it's hard for us to be granular in having that conversation with the application owners or the business owners. So BlueXP, data classification, tell me more.
Oh, wow. Classification is just that. So formerly known as a product name known as DataSense, but in its entirety, what it's designed to do is go out and scan your NetApp ecosystem. So let's think your ONTAP arrays, E-series, you just point it at your NetApp storage and let it scan. In an ONTAP environment, imagine just being able to go out and identify and classify all of the unstructured data, being able to crack open databases and find that PII, find the data that you can't let get out. Or maybe it's also discovering where all of your duplicate data is. Because when we go to, my backups have gotten unruly. I'm protecting too much, or it's costing me too much. My backups cost too much. Can you help me reduce my backup licensing costs? One of the first things I ask is, have you gone through and identified all of the data? Do you know where all of your stale data is? In other words, that which hasn't been accessed or touched in months, years. Have you looked for all of your duplicate data? Do you know that you've got 1,000 copies of this one database? Do you really need 1,000 copies? Or can you pare that down? So it goes back to, if you've identified everything, now you can go out and create those protection policies based on that call it gold, silver, bronze type protection policy or catalog, if you will. Maybe you want to create some chargeback, shameback models for those that abuse capacity, because everyone always stays within their agreed upon capacity limits, right?
Always.
100%. Nobody ever goes over. But but again, it's all about understanding the lay of the land, because all too often, in my experience, I know in my day, it was always the backup software that was considered the source of truth or source of record, if
Right.
you will, of what we have. But in this day and age where we're all, ransomware is in every single conversation. I mean, you can't go 3-4 minutes in a technical or IT conversation and ransomware not creep in. We back when we were all in the office, we didn't look over our shoulder or ever think that the guy sitting, gal sitting next to us was, some bad actor or ticked off because they got a bad message or something, and now they're out deleting data. We never imagined that back in the day. And that is reality today. So again, you have to go out and identify all of this, classify it, build this out so that once you know what you have, Then you can go through and build out the protection policies and have those conversations. You can export the data, send it to the business units or the line of business or the application owners, have them sign off on it. And that way it's not the storage guys and gals trying to figure out what's critical and what's not.
Okay, so now I've classified my data. I'm having a better working relationship with the line of business. They understand in non-IT terms what I'm talking about when I try to help them understand what they have and what that footprint is for them. Now, let's talk about what I can do to track, detect, and protect against actual attacks as they're happening.
Oh man. So it doesn't get any closer to the data than being built into the operating system.
Right?
Remember? So that's where we have what autonomous ransomware protection that's built in. Imagine having large language models that have been trained to identify ransomware. And now we have the ability built into the OS within ONTAP to scan and identify. We're going to look at things like the file entropy or the randomness of the data within the file. We're going to look at file extensions. We're even going to look at the headers of the file too, just to kind of understand what's going on with this data. If something doesn't look right or we notice some entropy changes, the whole point of this is designed to take a snapshot. Autonomous ransomware doing that onboard scanning, again, it doesn't get any closer than right there in the volume with the data. And it's so that when something happens, we can take that snapshot and minimize the blast radius. Keep in mind, our snapshots are already immutable by default, meaning I can't crack open the snapshot, make a change, and then save it back. So if we've got this file system that has millions and millions of tiny little files and we start to see them beginning to be encrypted, we're going to take that snapshot in seconds. And that could mean the difference if we're doing something in the comparison between in the operating system versus a third-party monitoring tool. That monitoring tool is just as valuable, but it's still simple physics and it's going to take time. Maybe it's a few more seconds, maybe it's a minute. But in that time, that could be the difference of hundreds to thousands of different files. And so restoring this data isn't the hard part. We all know with snapshots, we can restore terabytes upon terabytes of data in a matter of seconds. But what we don't have the ability to do is control that which happens to exist when there's been a breach or compromised data, something ransomware. It tends to involve either your security or the customer security organization, maybe it's third-party security, maybe even law enforcement. And so what takes the most time is determining that the data is clean and sanitized before it goes back in. So if you only have, call it, tens of files to confirm versus the potential thousands that could have been encrypted just in a matter of a minute, well, that's going to significantly reduce the
Right?
time to recovery. But then we can take it a step further. Being able to lock that data down at the snapshot layer, and then also we can even replicate that data. Now we can recover the data elsewhere. Maybe we need to recover it in a clean room so that we don't propagate this elsewhere. So this is where we begin to, again, it goes back to having those pool of resources where you can
Right?
deploy and manage the way your business sees fit. So it's one thing to be able to do this for file workloads. Our next release coming, I believe the July, August timeframe, we're releasing the ability to do this on block workloads. Being
That's
able to
exciting.
turn on autonomous ransomware protection for block workloads. And I mean production block workloads too. Today, you can't do that. What we do is you're not going to turn on, like you mentioned, snap block. We aren't going to lock anything down in a production because those LUNs have to be read-write. But I can take snaps all day long and protect that data. And what's actually done with the ability to add in tamper-proof snapshots, what we've done now is we've changed how people are protecting it. We actually have seen customers out there, they have increased the frequency of their snapshots for
Right?
those critical LUNs. Those volumes now, they ramped it up. They're doing snapshots every 5 minutes, but they lock the snaps for no more than, call it, 3 days. What they've in essence created is they've got a rolling, call it 288 locked recovery points each day that rolls after 3 days. So if you imagine 288 restore points for 3 days each, and If something happens, you can blow away the line, recover right there in place. You just want to grab a file, you can actually clone the snapshot, extract whatever you want. So again, it's all about having those resources available to use when you need to, not having a vendor saying thou shalt put round peg in round hole.
So one of the things that Evolving Solutions is seeing and using is, you already talked about it, if I have all of these snapshots, not only can I put them in place, but I can use them elsewhere. So in concert with those third-party data protection products, I can also set up a clean room, clone my storage, present that clone, and do work ahead of time so that I can increase my confidence level that that data set is protected. It is clean data so that I can restore it in a hurry. Now, that process ends up, it desperately requires automation and orchestration, right? There's no way that even a large team of people really have the time to do that manually. But if my storage can be automated, if I have APIs open for that, and my data protection platform has automation, and my hypervisor or my compute layer lends itself to all of that, then I can start to stitch together the ability to validate my data set before, as well as creating clean rooms to validate data after an attack. Because the real goal is, how do we shorten the amount of time it takes us to get the company back to where it needs to be in production again?
Absolutely. And so you hit on some really key things. One, the speed at which we can move, pivot, recover where we need to, when we need to. But then on top of that, it goes back to having those resources
Right?
to deploy when we need to, not necessarily as often where we're dictated. And it's one thing to be able to act with speed, but it's another to be able to practice this. If you think about it, Tom Brady, he didn't become the GOAT just by rolling out of bed one day, picking up a football and saying, hey, I can throw this thing. No, it's the countless hours of practice, review, testing, reviewing, looking at the results, revising. This is also part of it. And so part of that resiliency is building in the ability to not just have those policies and have the automation, but also testing the recoverability. It is imperative, one, that folks, even be it backup, be it DR, you have all of this documented. We all know DR plans, incident response plans, inject the name of whatever customers
Right?
call these plans. We all have their own title for it. But I know when I was the keyboard, it sat on the shelf.
Right?
We pulled it down every once in a while, or we knew where it was and under all that dust. But the other question then begs, how frequent do customers pull those run books down,
Mhm.
go through and test these? And so that's building that ability to clone and create failover testing so that you can then build in reports so that you can send those reports up to the C-suite so that our C-level leaders can sleep well at night.
And if I do that, and I do that in a clean room or tangentially, so I'm not affecting production, I can get the line of business to be more involved. So now, instead of there being this hair on fire running back and forth, nobody knows what's going on, I can build a consensus and an understanding that historically I really only saw when a customer, unfortunately, the burned hand taught best, right? Now, hopefully, if I have these tools, this automation, this orchestration, and an ability to do things in a way that doesn't impact the line of business, I get the business itself, I get the security team, legal compliance, regulatory to contribute, because now the process of testing becomes less painful for them as well.
That's it. So how often are we in IT? Rarely are we we are a cost center. We are typically revenue generating until we turn this around, and we've after we've identified and classified and assigned ownership, all of a sudden we can become revenue generating because we can
Right.
create chargebacks to the lines of business, and being able to add this in, but then even being able to perform those tests and functions from a non-disruptive function. Now we're not so bad. We don't come with that stigma of, oh man, IT's coming. They're going to just create problems. There's going to be downtime. They've got to test this. Oh, it's going to be brutal. No, it shouldn't be disruptive to the business. If it is, you've got bigger challenges. You've got bigger problems. Being able to test this is table stakes in just being able to remain online and continue to conduct business in the middle of this. So we've got to have that feature and functionality to be able to test and then review and revise not just our implementation, but our recovery strategies too. And it doesn't matter whether it's fail over, fail back from keeping the lights on and disaster recovery, or testing our backups and performing test restores to ensure that the data is valid.
So then what you're really describing in big animal terms is how IT can pivot to being agile in the same way that the business needs to pivot to be agile. And if IT is sitting at the table as a partner in the line of business, we have the ability to support them in their net new business initiatives because we know about the data, understand the workloads. Hopefully, we've had a conversation where we've normalized the value of the data, the value of the workload in such a way that data goes to the right place at the right time for the right cost. Recovery happens at the right speed in the right way while still meeting whatever that legal, forensic, regulatory, and compliance, which I don't even want to get on my high horse about how often do we find now that IT suddenly can become a savior when insurance says, do you have an ITDR plan for ransomware?
Yes. Oh, this is huge. So, going back to that conversation around ransomware, is in every single conversation, it only made sense with all this that there it being cyber resilience or cyber recovery insurance. And that's where things like reference architectures come into play.
Right?
Did people realize, do people realize if they've got NetApp on the floor out there with ONTAP, they've got the ability to pull down reference architecture for a cyber vault, a vault in which they can keep that gold copy of the data for when it hits the proverbial fan, not if. We all know. In fact, I believe it was the CEO of Palo Alto that stood on stage and basically told everybody they are in our network, they are in our environments. It is no longer a matter of if, it is when. So
Right?
we all know that they're in there. Wouldn't we rather have what the tools that we need to be prepared for this? So it's giving that pool of resources in which they have the ability to perform all of this, taking that tertiary, that gold copy, that vault, but then turning around and on top of that, keep in mind, we are the only vendor that is approved to house top secret government communication. So we don't necessarily get into the three-letter acronyms and all that. We've actually got reports out there that show that we are the only storage vendor with that certification. But the fact of the matter is, being able to build that reference architecture, house that cyber vault, and then take that to your cyber insurance company to say, we can guarantee that our data is recoverable. Because not only do we as a customer have confidence, but our vendor, NetApp, they have a recovery guarantee that they put their money where their mouth is and back their product with their own guarantees. So we put that out there as well. So absolutely, we want to have these conversations with cyber insurance companies to give them the things like the reference architecture of a cyber vault, as well as the security references that we have as well. Can create huge savings for those premiums.
So let's summarize then, shall we? Between Evolving Solutions and NetApp. First, we have a tool set. We have a common interface for administering storage in cloud, on-prem, at the edge, in the data center. We have, with BlueXP, a common interface for ransomware malware detection, for looking at reporting, classifying, and observing all the data, regardless of where it lives in the enterprise. And between functions like replication and snaplock and multi-validated authentication, we have the ability to create availability and data protection schemas that help the business. And we have the ability to work not just in an island, but across the industry with whatever third-party data protection tools, whatever security tools are necessary to craft the big animal solution to help the customers move forward.
I don't think I could have said it better myself. I mean, you nailed it, absolutely.
Does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions in the chat for us? So far, it looks good.
Awesome.
Do you have any final comments, Kevin?
Oh, actually, Ted, I had one question for you, and it
Yep.
was around all of this, and because we talked about a whole spectrum of resilience, from data protection to high availability, DR, and of course all of the NetApp features and how they align with these needs. But what would you say, evolving solutions? You get to see this in so many ways, and at so many levels as well. And I'd be curious, Dave, what you feel the most critical takeaway for organizations that look to align their IT strategy with business objectives. And how does that, how do you see, or what do you see as the most critical takeaway that organizations can take away from a conversation like this?
Believe it or not, I'm going to say something that's probably going to be fairly thought-provoking. The most critical thing is to start by making sure that IT is sitting at the table talking to the line of business and to the security organization, that long before people buy more products or start trying to design something, they have to have a conversation. I have customers every day that don't realize that the products they already have, often with NetApp, already have the functions that they're looking for, and they don't even know that they're turned on or that they're available to be turned on, often at no additional charge, right? So I would say the first big takeaway is that customers need to sit down internally, and if they'd like, Evolving Solutions is certainly happy to help chair that conversation, where they figure out how to align IT with security with the business.
Absolutely, it's spot on. We've got to have more people talking about this. To your point, everyone has a role and responsibility in this. So I could not agree with you more. Everyone needs to be asking these questions and asking if these policies are in place, and if not,
And
how can they
elevating
get
that
them?
conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Ted, this is awesome.
Excellent. Thank you for being our guest barista today. And as always, let's get to work.